All right, we are going to continue in our series we've affectionately titled Bless 'Em. We've been learning what it means to live a life on the mission that God has given us and left to us, His church. What does it look like to engage with people? How Christ engaged with people and be a blessing to them. And so one of the ways that we recognize this is that first of all, we receive God's great blessing to us through the good news of Jesus Christ, through His many gifts in our families and through our jobs, through His provision, through a church community that loves and supports one another, through opportunities to serve and to give of our time and energy and effort to others. And we've just summarized it with this reality that Jesus instructs us, and that's that blessed people bless people. That the good things that God gives us aren't meant to be for our own use only, but we are to go out as lights in a world of people who are desperately in need of relationship and hope and love and kindness. And not only can we do that here in our neighborhoods, but we have a last-minute opportunity for you to do that with one of our international partners. And maybe you saw the slide earlier, but there's kind of this last-minute trip to Guadalajara, Mexico, that we're putting together to hang out with our partners, Zach and Julie Stutler there. They're getting ready to retire and come off of the mission field, but we have this sense as a church that God is calling us to stay committed to a city where there's less than 2% evangelical Christians who are following Jesus. And so this trip is the end of August, right? And Jen's leading the trip. So if you're interested in this, like I said, it's last minute. There's a lot of things that need to come together. But you can talk to Jen about it, and there'll be an informational meeting in 2 Sundays from now on June 30th. So make sure you touch base with Jen if you are interested in this. Because God's mission goes all around the world. As the Christian Missionary Alliance, we love to talk about those who are willing and have sensed God's calling to go to new places and new people, go to some of the least reached places and the hardest people in order to share the good news of the gospel with them. But the calling is not different than your and my calling. We are called to do the same. We are just assigned different places and different people. And so this idea of living this life on mission to be a blessing and shine as a light to those around us is for all who call themselves followers of Jesus. And we've talked about what this looks like, and we've used BLESS as the acronym to live a life engaged in blessing of others, of demonstrating the love of Christ to others. That first of all, we begin with prayer. That we come to the one who knows exactly what's going on in our lives and the lives of those around us, and we submit ourselves to Him. We submit our wills to Him, and we ask Him to open doors and move in people's lives. We've asked that you take time at least once a week to pray for your neighborhood, to go on a prayer walk or prayer drive or whatever the case may be. And out in the lobby, you've been filling out these tags of where you've been praying and what God has said in the midst of those times of prayer, because ultimately, while you are pretty awesome, like, you're pretty amazing, the people in our neighborhoods don't need more of you or more of me. They need more of Jesus. And so we want God to reveal Himself to them. And so we begin with prayer, and then we take a posture of listening. We don't take a posture of speaking or telling first. We first listen, and we try to understand what is going on in people's lives. And then last week, many of you really liked this next bit. We talked about how easy it is to build relationships over a meal or a cup of coffee or whatever you love to eat, a Taco Bell taco or cooking something at your house. Whatever your level of hospitality is, it's so simple to invite someone to share a few minutes to be fully present with them over a Chick-fil-A sandwich or a cup of tea. And so you can eat and share your story with those around you. And many of you were like, yes, high five. I like that strategy. That sounds fantastic. And today I want to talk about what it looks like to then serve. How do we serve with love those that God has put around us? But here's where we're at. I believe that if you've begun to pray, you've looked for opportunities to just listen to other people's stories, I'm guessing that there are doors of relationship and conversation that have begun to open to you that maybe haven't been there before. You see, it's simple acts that reposition us and reorient our perspective to see what God is doing all around us. And I'd love to hear stories of how God has opened doors that maybe you didn't expect before. Today we're going to talk about why and how we can serve people. And we start with this reality that Jesus came to serve people. That though he's the king of the universe, he is the Alpha and the Omega, he is the one for whom and through whom all of creation has been made. He is the king of the universe, and his kingdom will invade this earth with absolute victory, never to be thwarted. But he came in order to serve. I love this passage in Mark chapter 10. It says, "So Jesus called them together and said, 'You know that the rulers in this world lord it over their people, and officials flaunt their authority over those under them.'" Let me say that again. "You know that the rulers in this world lord it over their people, and officials flaunt their authority over those under them." Some of you are like, yeah, that's my boss. I totally understand that. Like that there's people that use power and position to demand you to do things, and they do it in a way that wields that power and position not for your benefit, but for their own benefit. And some of you know people that lead in this type of way, but Jesus says something different. In the next verse, he says, "But among you, it will be different. Whoever wants to be a leader among you must be your servant." Not be your boss, not be your commander, but be your servant. "And whoever wants to be first among you must be the slave of everyone else. For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve others, and to give his life as a ransom for many." We see that Jesus came not to be served, though he deserved to be served, but he chose intentionally to lay his life down for the benefit of other people. That Jesus came to give his life, not in order to coerce or guilt people into following him, but in the greatest act of service. Some people like to serve others, but they only serve others so that they can get served in return, right? So you know you're serving others so for what you can get in return if you start having feelings of resentment in the service. Right? You start serving others and you're like, man, they didn't even say thank you. They didn't notice this. I didn't get a card in the mail. It's those feelings of resentment that help us identify, oh, I'm only doing this nice thing, this act of kindness, in order to get something in return. I'm only serving in order to get those good feelings of how it makes me feel when I do something nice for others. But if those feelings aren't there, then, well, what's the point of serving? And Jesus says, no. This is not to benefit you. This is a laying down of your own self for the sake of other people. And so this kind of service, this joy-filled, selfless, laying down of what I want out of this kind of service is what Jesus has demonstrated to you and to me. It's what he invites us into in order for the sake of our neighbors. I would say this: service is at the center of Jesus' strategy. And I was praying about this morning and praying about this message and this phrase, and I didn't have time to change it, but I circled it and I wrote a note, and I'm like, actually, I don't think that's the correct phrase. That that service is at the center of Jesus' strategy, though everywhere he went, he served without resentment those who were around him. And I just feel like strategy feels like service is something we kind of bolt on when we want to, and we don't do when we don't want to. We do when it feels like it benefits the advancement of something that we're trying to advance. And maybe I would say this about service, that service flows from the center of Jesus' identity. Service flows from the center of Jesus' identity. Jesus did not need someone to come back and say, thank you. Or to come back and say, I recognize that you're the Son of God. After all, I'm going to worship and follow you. Sometimes it looked like Jesus got taken advantage of. And yet, because in his identity, he knew he was a beloved son of his heavenly Father, that he was the Son of God, that he was able to give without needing in return. And that's the kind of service that we are invited into. And so all of this, you can engage in being a blessing to other people, but at its center is an invitation to know and trust in God more and to have a close, abiding relationship with him where we are constantly being filled up so that when we're poured out, we don't need other people to pour in. Service flows from the center of Jesus' identity. And this is why many of us love to serve, is because we feel like it fills up a part of our identity, right? We feel wanted, valued, needed. In moderation, that is okay. But when it becomes the center of who you are, I'm the person who does this, and that thing gets taken away, and we feel out of balance of where am I and where do I fit? We have put service in the place of our identity in Christ. And so many of us should come and fix our eyes on Jesus to see how he serves. And so for some of us also, it's our insecurities that actually keep us from serving others well. Without the fear of people pleasing, without the fear of response and reaction, it's our insecurities. And so we need to come to our Heavenly Father and allow him to shore up who we are in Christ. We need to trust that we really are deeply loved sons and daughters. Because then when we lean into these relationships and God opens doors and gives us opportunities to serve, we don't do it with an expectation of return. We don't do it with that hint or tinge of resentment. We don't do it in order to get, but we do it because of what we have and who we are. Jesus demonstrates this way of serving. We don't use serving as a strategy. It flows from us being dearly loved children of God. And so I want us to turn our attention to another passage in Mark chapter 7. And this is a great story that'll help give us some categories on how we can serve others well. In Mark chapter 7, we see this as part of Jesus' ministry, and he's leaving the area of Tyre and Sidon, which if you think of a map of Israel and the Middle East, it's northeast, or northwest, up and to the left, near the coast of the Mediterranean Sea, and he's walking down through the region of Galilee where he gets to the area of 10 towns or the Decapolis. And so they've been on this journey ministering to others throughout these regions. So that's where we pick up in Mark chapter 7, verse 31. It says, Jesus left Tyre and went back up to Sidon before going back to the Sea of Galilee in the region of the 10 towns. A deaf man with a speech impediment was brought to him, and the people begged Jesus to lay his hands on the man to heal him. Jesus led him away from the crowd so they could be alone. He put his fingers into the man's ears, and then, spitting on his own fingers, he touched the man's tongue. Now, not saying that this is how you should go about loving your neighbor and serving them. This is what Jesus did. So we kind of get, raise an eyebrow at that. But in the next verse it says, Jesus looking up to heaven, he sighed and said, Ephphatha, which means be opened. Instantly the man could hear perfectly, and his tongue was freed, so he could speak plainly. Jesus told the crowd not to tell anyone, but the more he told them not to, the more they spread the news. They were completely amazed and said again and again, everything he does is wonderful. He even makes the deaf to hear and gives speech to those who cannot speak. There's this beautiful miracle that Jesus performs in a slightly odd way, right? But it was this act of service that Jesus had as he was making his way from one place to another. And so let me just give you 4 realities of being able to serve others well. First, we must be people that are in proximity to others in order to serve them well. We see in the first couple of verses in this passage that Jesus left Tyre and went up to Sidon before going back to the Sea of Galilee and the region of the 10 towns. A deaf man with a speech impediment was brought to him, and the people begged Jesus to lay his hands on the man to heal him. We must be people who are in proximity, who are close by others in order to serve them well. In fact, God has put people around you on purpose, for this purpose, in order to pray for and listen and eat with and serve them. Now, there's people that are around you that you're like, oh yeah, I can't wait to serve this person. My neighbor Jose is one of those guys. In fact, he's super sacrificial and loves to serve as well. We were just talking the other day. We were letting him know we're getting ready to go away on vacation for a week. And he's like, hey man, you want me to mow your yard while you're away? I'm like, yes, I do. I do want you to do that. There's just a beautiful, non-prompting, servant-hearted that flowed out of Jose, and that's a beautiful thing. Who wouldn't want their neighbor to offer to be served in that way or to serve them in that way? And then there's probably some neighbors that you think about and you're like, I don't think I want to serve that one. Maybe I want to serve them an eviction notice or something like it just, there's something stuck in our hearts, in our relationship with them. And that's why we need to trust that the Lord has put them there and you there on purpose. That just as God calls people to leave their homes here in the United States and travel to other parts of the world in order to be a light for Jesus Christ, that God has called you to where you are in order to serve the people around you. You may have think that you chose your house on Zillow, and it was just because it was the best deal, and you were the best, you had all this research done, spreadsheet after spreadsheet, and it was your will and decision that led you where you're at. It might feel like your job is the one that moved you from where you are to here, but truly it is God who has ordained the times and places for all people. He has brought you in proximity to the people around you so that you can serve them. Are we willing to be like Jesus, who served this guy that was right in front of him? See, the truth of the matter is we are all sent people. Who has God sent you to? And who has God brought to you? To serve well, we must serve within proximity. We can't serve from a distance. We can't give our way out of service, hoping that somebody else will stand in the gap for us. We must serve. Second, Jesus teaches us that we should serve perceptively. In verse 33, it says, Jesus led this man away from the crowd so that they could be alone. It's not really clear why Jesus led him away. It could be multiple reasons. Maybe that there was a lot of shame associated with him being deaf and having a speech impediment, that Jesus knew that because of this shame, he was especially sensitive for this to be a public affair, that it would feel like he was being used for another purpose, for Jesus's fame or advancement or something like that. Maybe there were people in that crowd who had ridiculed him or rejected him, and so Jesus was sensitive to that. Whatever the case may be, Jesus perceived that he needed to lead this man away. Other translations said that he took him aside, right? And now some of us don't have a positive relationship with that phrase, being taken aside. Right? Remember when you're a kid and your dad has to take you aside for a private conversation. This usually had to do for me with something I was doing wrong at the time. Or maybe you're in a group setting and your wife makes eye contact with you and she just gives you the come here finger. She needs to take you aside for a reason, whatever the case may be. This was a purpose bringing away from the crowd that Jesus did with this man. He didn't want to make it a spectacle. But what we do know is that Jesus is able to understand what this man needs beyond the obvious. And this is why we've got to listen before we serve. We have to lean in towards understanding before we try to help. Stephen Covey, in his book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, has one of the habits is seek first to understand. And he tells the story of this time that he was in New York City and he was riding the subway, and at this one subway stop, a man and his 2 sons get on the train. And these boys are not sitting quietly. They are loud, they're jumping on their seats, they're misbehaving, they're out of control, and Covey is just waiting for the dad to step in. To say, hey, this is not acceptable behavior here. We're in public. This is not okay. And the dad never says anything. And eventually, the author says, I was just so frustrated, and I decided to intervene. And so he goes over and he says to the dad, he says, you should probably do something about your kids. And the dad says, you're totally right, but we just came from the hospital and their mom just died, and I don't really know what to do next. And so often, it's a powerful story. Often what we see is not truly what people are going through. We must seek first to understand and be like Jesus, who had a perception of how this man needed to be served, and so he took him aside. Even that story that I tell about the subway makes us have this sense of, because we must serve people personally. In verse 34, it says that looking up to heaven, Jesus sighed. It's a weird phrase to put in there, unless it means something besides, like it's not this passive grunt. This word literally means in the Greek is this kind of guttural, emotional expression that looking up to heaven, Jesus had compassion on this man. He had connected himself to this man's plight and had empathy and compassion towards him and wanted God to do something as much as the man wanted God to do something. There's a personal connection that we are invited into. That we should be people that not just serve our neighbors to be good Christians, but we understand what they're going through. And so when they're going through something difficult, we feel it. We feel it. When we serve others, we must serve with proximity. We must serve perceptively. We must serve personally. And then we must serve powerfully. Jesus shows us how this man is healed, and it's, again, verse 34, it says, looking up to heaven. Listen, we serve a God who is able to heal and deliver and transform, and we don't need to apologize for that in our relationships with others. We can trust that God is powerful and He is able to do far more than we can ask or imagine. Jesus chose in that moment to say, I could say nice things and do good things, but I'm going to access God's power for this person. And that's the same for us, that we too should access God's power in prayer for those that God has put us around. And so if somebody is sick, pray that God would heal them. If somebody has a broken relationship, pray that God would reconcile that relationship. If somebody is in need of provision, then pray that God would intervene and provide beyond what they could think they even need. We serve a God who loves the people that He's put you around way more than you ever will. And so are we willing? Are we willing to access God's power in our service of others? For some of us, it may just mean, God, will you give me the strength to go and have a conversation? Will you give me the strength to loan this tool to this neighbor who still has 3 other tools in their garage? We need God to do something in our lives and through our lives that is greater and beyond what we have to offer, because you are great. You are pretty amazing. But your neighbors don't need more of you. They need more of Jesus. We must serve with proximity, serve the people that God has put right in front of us, perceptively, with a compassionate heart, listening to others. Personally, that we would feel the pain, anxiety, and other things that those are going through, and pray powerfully that we would trust that God would move through what He leads us to do. And so as we close, let me just ask you these questions in reflection. As we've talked about these principles on how to bless others, who is God laying on your heart? Who is God laying on your heart? Is there one person that comes to mind, or one face that comes into your mind as you think about this? And as we enter into this next week, what is one way that God may be asking you to serve them? He's brought them to mind for a reason. He's brought them to mind so that you would bring them to the throne of God in prayer. He's brought them to mind so that you would make yourself available to be a vessel of love, compassion, kindness, truth, and God's power to those people.